I'm Mark Golub, and my friends, remember this day. Jewish history is being made today, December 6th, 2017, when the President of the United States, Donald Trump, announced to the world that after nearly 70 years of Israeli statehood, the United States is formally acknowledging and affirming the intrinsic legitimacy of the State of Israel by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. We should not misunderstand the enormity of President Trump's changing U.S. policy. By recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the United States is giving the Jewish state an element of legitimacy it has been denied since the nation's founding on May 14, 1948. For as long as the United States led Western nations of the world in refraining from recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the United States was actually complicit in the Arab world's contention that Israel was illegitimate, that Israel did not have the sovereign right enjoyed by every other nation in the world to determine its capital city. The U.S. places its embassy in the capital city of every nation with which it has diplomatic ties. Every nation, except for Israel. And despite the protests who claim the sky's about to fall in the Middle East because of the president's decision, the issue of Jerusalem precedes Israel's coming into control of the West Bank. From 1948 to 1967, when Israel was not on the West Bank, the United States refused to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which meant the United States was actually complicit in the Arab world's refusal to accept Israel's overall legitimacy. If Israel did not have the right to determine its own capital inside the Green Line, what's now known as West Jerusalem, nothing to do with East Jerusalem, the Old City, or the West Bank, then the United States was really saying Israel was less than a legitimate sovereign state. People are claiming that Donald Trump's recognition of Israel makes it impossible for the United States to be, quote, an honest broker, unquote. But actually, as long as the United States was participating in the Palestinian position that Israel is illegitimate, without the right to determine its own capital, it should be determined in negotiations with the Palestinians, then the United States was forfeiting its stature as an honest broker. Israel has every right to determine its capital city, the same right that every other nation on earth has, and a right which the United States respects in every other nation of the world. And all Donald Trump did today was to affirm Israel's right to do the same. Why did it take America so long? And as you're about to hear, the president went out of his way to say that his recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is not meant to prejudge Jerusalem's ultimate borders, which means that Donald Trump is not giving all of East Jerusalem to the State of Israel, that his administration remains fully committed to a two-state solution so long as both parties can come to an agreement, and that within that two-state solution, the boundaries of East Jerusalem are still to be negotiated by the parties. The import of Donald Trump's decision was to recognize a reality on the ground as it relates to at least West Jerusalem. By the way, I would suggest to anyone critical of the president's decision, read his remarks. Read them. And as you read them, hear them in Barack Obama's voice. Donald Trump's remarks today were flawless. They were eloquent. They were idealistic. They were embracing. And had Barack Obama read the exact same speech, there wouldn't be a whisper of criticism. From my perspective, this is a day for Jewish celebration, and for celebration by every principled man and woman of goodwill. By the way, if you're a regular viewer of JBS, you heard America's Israeli ambassador, David Friedman, virtually promise this day was on the horizon. It was coming. When I had the pleasure of speaking with him for JBS, here is this very brief clip of David Friedman speaking to me on JBS. Will the embassy be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem during Donald Trump's first 4 years in office?
I'm pretty confident that it will, yes.
Pretty confident that it will, yes. It was plain and simple. The Trump administration was going to recognize Jerusalem and move the embassy. And today, December 6th, 2017, Donald Trump finally did what president after president has promised to do before taking office. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. And by doing so, he legitimized Israel totally. Good for him. This day should be celebrated. And Donald Trump should be applauded. Doesn't matter whether you voted for him, you didn't vote for him. Whether you think he's the worst president to ever hold office, or you think he's changing America for the better. Today, Donald Trump did something important for world democracy and for the state of Israel, and therefore for the Jewish people. We should be celebrating. Now, if you missed the president's actual remarks, we'd like you to have a chance to hear them in their entirety now on JBS. Here is Donald Trump's remarks from the White House, December 6th, 2017.
Thank you. When I came into office, I promised to look at the world's challenges with open eyes and very fresh thinking. We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past. Old challenges demand new approaches. My announcement today marks the beginning of a new approach to conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. In 1995, Congress adopted the Jerusalem Embassy Act, urging the federal government to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize that that city, and so importantly, is Israel's capital. This act passed Congress by an overwhelming bipartisan majority and was reaffirmed by a unanimous vote of the Senate only 6 months ago. Yet for over 20 years, every previous American president has exercised the law's waiver, refusing to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem or to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. Presidents issued these waivers under the belief that delaying the recognition of Jerusalem would advance the cause of peace. Some say they lacked courage, but they made their best judgments based on facts as they understood them at the time. Nevertheless, the record is in. after more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering. I've judged this course of action to be in the best interests of the United States of America and the pursuit of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. This is a long overdue step to advance the peace process and to work towards a lasting agreement. Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like every other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital. Acknowledging this is a fact is a necessary condition for achieving peace. It was 70 years ago that the United States, under President Truman, recognized the state of Israel. Ever since then, Israel has made its capital in the city of Jerusalem, the capital the Jewish people established in ancient times. Today, Jerusalem is the seat of the modern Israeli government. It is the home of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, as well as the Israeli Supreme Court. It is the location of the official residence of the Prime Minister and the President. It is the headquarters of many government ministries. For decades, visiting American presidents, secretaries of state, and military leaders have met their Israeli counterparts in Jerusalem, as I did on my trip to Israel earlier this year. Jerusalem is not just the heart of 3 great religions, but it is now also the heart of one of the most successful democracies in the world. Over the past 7 decades, the Israeli people have built a country where Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and people of all faiths are free to live and worship according to their conscience and according to their beliefs. Jerusalem is today and must remain a place where Jews pray at the Western Wall, where Christians walk the stations of the cross, and where Muslims worship at Al-Aqsa Mosque. However, through all of these years, presidents representing the United States have declined to officially recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In fact, we have declined to acknowledge any Israeli capital at all. But today we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. It's something that has to be done. That is why, consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This will immediately begin the process of hiring architects, engineers, and planners so that a new embassy, when completed, will be a magnificent tribute to peace. In making these announcements, I also want to make one point very clear. This decision is not intended in any way to reflect a departure from our strong commitment to facilitate a lasting peace agreement. We want an agreement that is a great deal for the Israelis and a great deal for the Palestinians. We are not taking a position of any final status issues. including the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders. Those questions are up to the parties involved. The United States remains deeply committed to helping facilitate a peace agreement that is acceptable to both sides. I intend to do everything in my power to help forge such an agreement. Without question, Jerusalem is one of the most sensitive issues in those talks. The United States would support a two-state solution if agreed to by both sides. In the meantime, I call on all parties to maintain the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites, including the Temple Mount, also known as Haram al-Sharif. Above all, our greatest hope is for peace, the universal yearning in every human soul. With today's action, I reaffirm my administration's longstanding commitment to a future of peace and security for the region. There will, of course, be disagreement and dissent regarding this announcement. But we are confident that ultimately, as we work through these disagreements, we will arrive at a peace and a place far greater in understanding and cooperation. This sacred city should call forth the best in humanity, lifting our sights to what it is possible, not pulling us back and down to the old fights that have become so totally predictable. Peace is never beyond the grasp of those willing to reach it. So today we call for calm, for moderation, and for the voices of tolerance to prevail over the purveyors of hate. Our children should inherit our love, not our conflicts. I repeat the message I delivered at the historic and extraordinary summit in Saudi Arabia earlier this year. The Middle East is a region rich with culture, spirit, and history. Its people are brilliant, proud, and diverse, vibrant, and strong. But the incredible future awaiting this region is held at bay by bloodshed, ignorance, and terror. Vice President Pence will travel to the region in the coming days to reaffirm our commitment to work with partners throughout the Middle East to defeat radicalism that threatens the hopes and dreams of future generations. It is time for the many who desire peace to expel the extremists from their midst. It is time for all civilized nations and people to respond to disagreement with reasoned debate, not violence. And it is time for young and moderate voices all across the Middle East to claim for themselves a bright and beautiful future. So today, let us rededicate ourselves to a path of mutual understanding and respect. Let us rethink old assumptions and open our hearts and minds to possible and possibilities. And finally, I ask the leaders of the region, political and religious, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, to join us in the noble quest for lasting peace. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Israel. God bless the Palestinians. And God bless the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you.
There you have it, the words of Donald Trump announcing his administration's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to begin moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel's capital city. You know, this year is the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which is seen as the beginning of the world's move toward reestablishing the Jewish people's ancient homeland in Eretz Yisrael. It's also the 70th anniversary of the United Nations vote on partition, affirming this two-state solution in the British Mandate of Palestine. Now, 2017 will become a date of similar importance, for by affirming Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, President Trump has put the final seal of legitimacy on the modern state of Israel. It's taken virtually 70 years. And it's too bad that it's taken this long. And look, some of you may have seen, I wrote my own op-ed piece that was in the Times of Israel on World Jewish Daily, and we sent it out to those of you who are on our mailing list who receive our Sunday morning email. And if there are those of you watching JBS and you're not receiving our Sunday morning email, do yourself a favor. Go to our website, jbstv.org, and sign up for the Sunday morning email. And every Sunday morning, you'll receive notice of what programs we're going to be on in JBS this week. Anyway, the words of Donald Trump making Jewish history, not only American history, but Jewish history today, December 6, 2017. We want you to hear the thoughts of others who are now reacting to the president's decision. And I begin with someone you see here on JBS all the time. He's usually sitting right next to me, but right now he's on our JBS phones. Thane Rosenbaum, author and a major thinker and writer on the American Jewish scene. Thane, are you with us? Is Thane with us? Thane, can you hear me? We're having a little bit of trouble. Thane, can you hear me?
I can, Mark.
Thane, thank you for joining us. Look, I'd love to have your reactions, to hear what you have to say as you respond to President Trump saying that he's ready to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, you and I spoke about this on your program shortly after the election, and at that time I said, well, you know, I think it's probably a bad idea to make an embassy move, but I'm of changed mind on this issue. You know, I think that you know, if Trump really wants to present himself as the new sheriff in town, this is a really good way to do it. The Palestinians need to finally become reconciled to the fact that all of Jerusalem will not be theirs. Half might become their capital, but the Israelis aren't going anywhere. And this is a very strong American affirmation after decades and decades of not actually performing a gesture that was already in effect. This is Israel's capital. Jerusalem is the seat of government for the Jewish state. Nothing in this decision changes anything. Not one stone is being moved. This isn't about changing borders. This is just, you know, reaffirming what Congress had already said, that they acknowledge that this is Israel's capital. So I just think that any move, in this case symbolic, that demonstrates to Palestinians that it's time for them to get serious about statehood and nation building and stop their delusions and the fantasy that all of Jerusalem will one day be theirs. And maybe what we need to see more of is the kind of, you know, tough love against Palestinians. We've seen what Obama did with tough love against Israelis. But, you know, Obama was afraid to upset the Palestinians because they were the oppressed, you know, minority by a colonial power. It fit into that narrative. But I think it would behoove them more to not be racist toward them and treat them like children that can't control their urges and their impulses, and instead say, look, do you want to be a serious people or not? A serious people understands that you don't run out into the street and start shooting and engaging in days of rage. You recognize the reality on the ground. The Israelis are not going anywhere. This country is not going to be all of yours. You have a possibility of receiving part of this country as yours, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Do you want it or not? Because it's time to negotiate. For years during the Obama administration, the Palestinians refused to negotiate. They had no interest in negotiating. So in what way does the embassy move? What risk is involved here? They didn't want to talk before. They didn't want to give up incitement before. Why is it going to get worse? I think it can only get better.
Thane, how do you react to those who are arguing this jeopardizes the United States' ability to act as an honest broker?
Well, the Obama administration, abstained and rather than vetoed Resolution 2334, which essentially said that all of East Jerusalem, essentially all settlement building was illegal of Israel, and even the Western Wall, the occupation of the Western Wall was illegal under international law, which the United States never did before. So, I just think that, jeopardizing, I think if anything, this restores some of the moral balance to the conversation. Israel, what I think an honest broker does in this instance is attempt to do something that's been done before, which is to actually insist that the Palestinians demonstrate a seriousness about nation building. And ending their incitement. Mark, one of the things that this story about the embassy move has overshadowed, unfortunately, is that the House yesterday passed the Taylor Force Act, which is something I think about a lot and have written about a lot, and wrote an essay for the Washington Post early in this process.
Yes.
And this, to me, is a much bigger
story. By the way,
story.
you should explain what the Taylor Force Act is.
So to me, this is a much bigger story. Many people may remember that, I guess a year or so ago, during the stabbing intifada, which is this new wave of intifada, which is, the Palestinians invented yet another form of terrorism, which is, we just saw recently with ISIS here in New York City of, renting a car and ramming it into people or stabbing people in the streets. And this is something else the Palestinians have contributed to culture, the stabbing intifada. So during this new period of terrorist incitement, it just so happens an American veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, a young man, 28 years old, Taylor Force, not Jewish, by the way, who's getting his MBA in Vanderbilt, was traveling with his friends in Jerusalem, and he was stabbed and killed. This is an American war hero who's not Jewish, who just happened to be visiting Jerusalem and was stabbed and killed.
Exactly.
His parents, along with a number of courageous congressmen and senators, introduced the Taylor Force Act in his name. And because the parents discovered that, which is something that is somewhat not widely known, and when I wrote about it in the Washington Post, I was shocked at how much mail I received, which is that the United States contributes to the Palestinian Authority's budget, and roughly 8-9% a year of that budget goes to paying the salaries and stipends to terrorists who kill Israelis.
Exactly.
It incentivizes the murder of Jews and Israelis. In this case, it killed Taylor Force. But by the way, the person who killed Taylor Force, his family received, I think it was either the death benefit or he's going to be in jail for the longer you spend time in jail, the higher the payment is. It's a monthly salary. It also includes life insurance. It includes health care. And it includes an education stipend for your family.
Okay.
members.
And forgive me, why you're saying that for you, I don't think you and I agree here. I think that this move by President Trump is enormous because what it really does is it gives the seal of total legitimacy to the State of Israel, which Israel has lived without since 1948. You're saying that for you, Taylor Force is even more important.
Oh,
but
well, because the reason I said to you when we talked about this a year ago, Mark, I thought that for me, I would have rather seen the Trump administration become much more forceful in stopping terrorism and incitement among Palestinians.
I agree.
To me, that's a much bigger issue.
I understand. But I don't think any of us should minimize the historic proportion. As you said when you first began, we've been waiting for this for 70 years, Thane.
Right.
And what Trump says is it's an acknowledgement of the obvious. That's all this is. Israel's capital is Jerusalem. And the only reason president after president has refused to acknowledge what Trump acknowledges today is that there is a buckling in to some vague notion that it'll make matters worse because the Palestinians will just be enraged that the United States is saying we recognize Jerusalem as the capital. And Thane, you and I both heard, Donald Trump says we're not prejudging the ultimate borders of Jerusalem. He means by that East Jerusalem, and that the borders must be worked out by the two parties in direct negotiations. And neither you nor I, Thane, believe the Palestinians are going to come to the table and make any kind of peace agreement with Israel. But in the meantime, what has finally happened is that the leading nation of the Western world, the United States, has said to Israel, you know what? The same right every other nation of the world has. Every sovereign nation gets to choose to designate its capital. Well, starting on December 6th, 2017, so does the State of Israel. And Thane, for me, that is an enormous step in the history of the State of Israel.
Look, I can't disagree with that, Mark. Clearly that's true. I'm just saying, materially speaking, symbolically it's huge. Materially speaking, it doesn't make a difference. For me, materially speaking, the United States, the Taylor Force Act, which is, you're not getting any money. Forget it. This is a material change. We're cutting your budget by the proportion of the funds that you misapply and misuse in rewarding terrorists for killing Israelis. That, to me, has serious material consequences. This is the thing that Abbas told. He first lied to Trump and said that we don't reward terrorists, and then, of course, Trump, called him out on the lie and said, "You lied to me directly." And then Abbas told his own people, "We will never give up paying this righteous." To him, this is a righteous deed. Killing Israeli civilians is righteous.
I understand.
And he said, "We will never give this up."
I understand.
So
and I appreciate what you're saying about tangible results. I do not disagree with you either. In this instance, I happen to think this is more than symbolic, that it makes a difference in how people will regard the State of Israel. One last question, and then we have other people on the line. Thane, and you and I are going to be in studio together very shortly. Thane, what did you think about the style, the verbiage of Donald Trump's remarks? What I said to the audience is, many people just detest Donald Trump. No matter what he does, they just can't embrace it. I said if you read his remarks, and as you read them, you hear them in Barack Obama's voice, the words were in many ways eloquent. I want to know if you share my feeling.
Look, when Donald Trump is on script, he can be presidential. His problem is his tweets. The problem is that he's very thin-skinned. And
that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, were you impressed with today's rhetoric?
With you. I think if you read his words, they were measured, they were presidential, they were appropriate for the occasion, and they spoke firmly, and at the same time they held out the possibility for peace, for an actual peace,
yes,
an aspiration that he wants. I'm just saying, this is not surprising. He in a situation like this, if he could do more of this, he would be more successful in his presidency.
I understand. Thane, it's always wonderful to get your perspective. You and I will be together very soon. I wish you all the best till then. Kol Tuv, and we'll talk soon.
See you soon, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
my friend.
audience.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that Donald Trump said was, his decision is not to predetermine specific boundaries of Jerusalem or to deal with contested borders, and that he was hoping that there would be now calm and moderation and voices of tolerance would prevail in the region. Again, who could ask for anything else to be said? There is, again, an idealism in this move, and I hear those who are critical, and I sometimes question, is it because it's Donald Trump? Is it because they fear Palestinian violence? Is Palestinian violence appropriate to the United States saying the sovereign state of Israel has the right to determine its capital? It seems to me that should be an outrage to anyone who is watching the Middle East and who cares about the future of humanity. Well, it's interesting to also hear how Israelis view what President Trump has said and done. And so I've got the great privilege of having Haviv Retugur on the line. He is the fabulous journalist from Times of Israel. Haviv, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Okay, what was your reaction? What do you hear the reaction to be in the state of Israel today in response to Donald Trump's remarks?
I think the striking thing for Israelis was how careful he was to really cover all the bases in terms of the Israeli perspective. There are Israelis who, I think there's a consensus among Israeli Jews, really outside the margins, just about all Israeli Jews, just view Jerusalem as Israel's obvious capital, have never thought anything else, and don't understand, why this is a debate, and don't really, I think, care what anyone else thinks. It's not the sort of thing where the world's opinion matters to Israelis. There's actually a lot less either excitement or tension among Israelis than among a lot of the sort of debating, people in the Middle East and in Washington. Israelis were a little, less drama. There's a little bit of a collective shrug here.
Mm-hmm.
But when Trump actually delivered that speech, and it was, of course, carried live, it was 8 o'clock news in Israel. It was primetime news in Israel, which I think was intentional. I think he was so careful. Whoever wrote that speech for him did such a good job.
Fabulous job.
In really making sure that the Israeli left was represented. So, for example, he took pains to say that this is not prejudicing where this line of sovereignty will pass, even within Jerusalem. Right. So, I don't know if that comforts any Palestinian, but in the Israeli context, you saw earlier today, for example, the Labour Party leader, Avi Gabay, who is the center-left leader in Israel, say that he welcomes, before Trump's speech, he said he welcomes Trump's decision, Trump's announcement, and hopes that it comes also with confidence-building measures for the Palestinians, so that this recognition, this validation of each other's positions is part of the beginning of a peace process and not the end of any hope for a peace process, and not saying united Jerusalem, not saying eternal whatever, all those code words that are essentially the Israeli right and its language and the Israeli center, was leaving that open. So I think in Israel he struck all the right chords. It was a speech written with very good ear for the Israeli discussion.
Mm-hmm. All right, Haviv, are Israelis now worried? Some have predicted that there will be an escalation of Palestinian violence against Israel. There are those who are worried that there's going to be violence against American embassies throughout the country, throughout the Muslim world, throughout the world, I should say. Do you have a sense that Israelis are now worried there's going to be an escalation of violence?
I think there's some concern, but I think the army has said that there's concern, and the people in charge of preventing that violence have been working overtime to make sure that they're ready if there is. But I think the concern isn't something that Israelis believe should stop them, which is to say, it's not just that Palestinian violence shouldn't dictate policy. It's also that if the response to what Trump said is violence, then there's an argument there about the invalidity of the Israeli presence, even in West Jerusalem, of any Israeli Jewish capital at all in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And that's an important lesson for Israel, an important thing that Israelis are watching for. Because for Israelis, and this is not obviously the Palestinian position, but for Israelis, the main source of this conflict continuing to be a conflict. We had 50 years Israel has been in the West Bank, but 25 of those years have been a peace process. And the main reason this peace process is half the lifetime of this conflict, and is farther from making peace, not closer, is that it doesn't actually deal with the fact that these are mutually sort of exclusive stories. The Palestinians, in the Israeli view, don't validate Israel's legitimacy, Israel's existence, the existence of a Jewish state in the way that Israeli Jews needed to exist. And this is a statement of that validity. The Jews belong here. And if the Palestinians respond to that with violence, that's one more example in the Israeli view of the Palestinian unwillingness to pursue any kind of peace that isn't ultimately victory. So I think that, that violence has a double-edged sword. Yes, the army has deployed a little bit. It's prepared. There's no lockdown on the West Bank. There's no massive, nobody's expecting a war. There is an expectation that around the edges in some places there's going to be some violence, some terror attacks. Of course, we just had a 2-year wave of stabbings because people have been telling the Palestinians that the Jews are going to take away the Temple Mount. So they don't need Trump to say anything for these kinds of things to happen.
Yes.
There are forces in Palestinian society maneuvering and trying to instigate this stuff for their own political gain, sometimes because they actually believe this thing about Israelis. But anyway, Israelis are not taking it very seriously.
Okay. Haviv, I've said that this is a significant day in Israeli history and therefore in Jewish history, because ultimately by recognizing Israel's sovereign right to designate its own capital, Donald Trump's administration has ultimately given the ultimate seal of legitimacy to the state of Israel. Any comment?
I disagree.
In what way?
This might be a little bit of an Israeli prejudice, but the world's opinion genuinely and truly and really and profoundly doesn't matter. Zionism
that is an Israeli perspective, and Haviv, I respect it. It is always wonderful to speak to you, and I'm so grateful that you gave us some time. It's late right now in the state of Israel. So thank you, my friend. I'll always chase you. You're fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You be well.
Have a good night.
Haviv Rettig-Gur, again, a fabulous journalist in the state of Israel for the Times of Israel. And it's interesting to hear an Israeli perspective. It is true. In America, it's a much bigger issue than it is to Israelis. For Israelis, Jerusalem's the capital of Israel. Leave us alone. But there is also an international diplomatic reality. And I'm not sure every Israeli cares or understands why it is so important. But what Donald Trump has done is, in fact, whether Israelis feel it was necessary or not, Donald Trump has given voice to a reality which many in the Western world, and the Palestinians who are still going to assume he's wrong, but many in the Western world have been absolutely reluctant, refused to make, that ultimately Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. We have somebody else on the line. What a thrill. Joining us right now is the author of Trumped Up, How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. You've heard him many times. You know he is one of my favorite people in the world, Alan Dershowitz. Alan, thank you for giving us a moment for JBS, and I want to know your reaction to the president's.
Okay. Look, it was a brilliant decision.
Yes.
Done exactly right. Let me tell you why.
Please.
President Obama tried to tie the hands of incoming President Trump during his lame duck period when he engineered the Security Council resolution that changed the status quo. It was President Obama who changed the status quo. He turned the Kotel, the Western Wall, Hebrew University, and Hadassah Hospital access roads in the Jewish Quarter into illegally occupied territory. That changed the status quo and made it very difficult for the Palestinians ever to accept less than that. It disincentivized them from coming to the bargaining table. Now you get President Trump, who says, we reject the UN resolution. It is a null and void as far as the United States is concerned. Now you can negotiate from equal status. The Palestinians will get their capital if they get a state. Nobody is precluding there being two capitals in Jerusalem. President has said this doesn't presuppose anything about the borders, but it finally keeps a campaign pledge, and it does something else. Every president who promised to bring Jerusalem recognition as the capital, every one of them has broke their promises. Mm-hmm. And what does that say about American policy when presidents break their promises? Here's a president who's finally kept his promise, and he did it in a very intelligent way. His statement was very thoughtful, and he undid the terrible harm done by President Obama in the last days of his administration. So 3 cheers for President Trump. He did exactly the right thing.
Okay. So I want to ask you to comment on some of the criticisms I'm hearing. On the one hand, people say this will make it more difficult for peace because it will enrage the Palestinians who might now engage in more violence.
Look, the Palestinians get enraged when you put a metal detector at the up in the Temple Mount.
Yes.
The Palestinians get enraged when their leaders tell them to get enraged. Rage is a tactic used by the Palestinians. And if any American president ever allows the threat of Palestinian violence to deter them from doing the right thing, it will simply encourage the Palestinians to use the threat of violence every time anything is done that upsets their leaders. So you don't make American policy based on the threat of violence. That's a very, very dangerous policy to pursue.
Beautiful. What about the notion that this decision will destabilize the Middle East?
I don't think it will. I think that it will bring the Palestinians to the bargaining table. They know they're not going to get themselves a state through the United Nations, through the International Criminal Court. They have to come to the bargaining table. Both sides have to make compromises, painful compromises, and that will bring stability to the Middle East. We're going to hear some complaints from the Saudis and the Jordanians, but, they have to do that to appeal to the street. But behind the scenes, I don't think they think this is such a big deal.
Okay, the other criticism is the United States has positioned itself as an honest broker, and this gets in the way of that.
Absolutely not. What happened is Obama eliminated the role of the United States as an honest broker and put not the thumb but the elbow on the scale against the Israelis when he engineered the lame duck Security Council resolution that changed the status quo. The status quo was nobody would make decisions about Jerusalem until there were bilateral negotiations, and then the UN unilaterally said, no, we're changing the status quo. We now decide that the Western Wall, the Hebrew University, the Jewish Quarter is Palestinian territory and illegally occupied by Israel. That was the change in the status quo. This helps restore balance and helps bring about equality and honest broker of the United States.
All right, I want to ask you a sensitive question about your own positions over time. You know, you've described to me on L'Chaim here on JBS, and I don't remember if I have all the details correct, but my recollection is you were a younger man, and your mother was in an audience, and you were speaking against settlements. Do I have it right?
Here, I had written a column and signed an op-ed against the building of a civilian settlement, Elan Moreh, in the territory that was claimed by the Palestinians. I didn't say it was illegal. I said it was not a good policy.
Right.
That's still my position. I haven't changed it.
And your mother?
And the Rabbi Schwartz, the rabbi in Young Israel of Borough Park, called me a traitor to the Jewish people in front of my parents, and that was a little bit of lack of derech eretz.
Yes.
And my parents were very upset, but they stood by me.
Okay. In light of the fact that you have been an advocate for moderation on the West Bank, you have not been a fan of Israeli settlement policy. In any way, can somebody say that the fact that you are now praising the president's decision to establish Jerusalem as the capital in any way is a change in Alan Dershowitz's position?
No, absolutely not. If he had announced that the West Bank is now appropriately under Israeli control, that would be very different. But I've always taken the position that Jerusalem should be recognized as the capital. You know, for the Pope, talk about chutzpah, for the Pope to come out against this, it's the UN resolution. It's as if the UN had resolved that the Vatican is illegally occupied by Catholics, or Salt Lake City is illegally occupied by the Mormons. The idea that Jerusalem is illegally occupied by the nation-state of the Jewish people is absurd and outrageous. And, you know, religious groups should not take positions on political issues.
Beautifully said. So what I said, Alan, was that in some way the president's remarks today, or the president's decision, is the ultimate seal of legitimacy for the state of Israel, because as long as Israel did not have the right to designate its own capital, there was an implicit question and an implicit negative about Israel's legitimacy. Do you share my view? Do you see it a different way?
I think that's right. Israel is the only country in the world that is not entitled to name its own capital, and now the United States says it is. One hopes that Canada will follow, maybe Australia would follow, some of the other countries. I don't think they will right away. Look, would it have been better if this grew out of a negotiated peace with the Palestinians? Absolutely. But as President Trump indicated, it's been years and years and years now since they've been postponing this in the hope that the Palestinians will come to the bargaining table. They haven't.
Yes.
So the time has come to keep the promise of American presidents to recognize what is obviously the fact historically and in every other way, that Jerusalem, where the Knesset is located, the Supreme Court is located, all the government offices are located, is the capital of Israel.
Of course. You and I both say, you said it very beautifully, that the speech itself was crafted very well. I believe that those who don't like Trump or hate Trump, if they only read the speech and heard it in Barack Obama's voice, it was in many ways eloquent. Alan, do you agree?
No, I agree with you. And Elliot Abrams, who's probably one of the most experienced diplomats regarding the Middle East, he got on television as soon as this was announced and said it was the right thing. It will help peace. It won't hurt peace. And I agree. Elliot was my student, so not surprising that I agree, but he's a Republican and conservative, and I'm a liberal and a Democrat. And I would hope that many liberal Democrats would join me in this case in praising a president we didn't vote for doing the right thing.
Alan, it's always an honor to have you on. I love you very much. I'll keep chasing you. And Alan, I see you're on television all the time because everybody wants your opinion, and you continue the good work you're doing. Trumped up how criminalization of political differences endangers democracy. You told me last time, though, you're in the middle of doing a new book, right?
It's coming out next week. It's called The Case Against BDS, Why Singling Out Israel for Boycott is Both Anti-Semitic and Anti-Peace. And I'm trying to get free copies distributed to every student on college campuses. If any of your listeners want to help contribute to that effort, I've waived all my royalties for the book in order to get the price so low that organizations can buy and distribute the anti-BDS book all over America to college campuses.
All right. When it comes out, we'll do something on JBS. We'll help you distribute it. But congratulations, Mazal Tov, and we'll talk again very soon. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you.
The thoughts of Alan Dershowitz, of course, Professor Emeritus of law at Harvard Law School, a champion of civil rights and human rights, and now Jewish rights, especially as they apply to the State of Israel. And he takes an awful lot of heat from people who are liberal Democrats who once thought he was a major voice of reason on the American scene, because Alan continues to be an honest voice of reason, and his positions offend those who are just, for them, it's all about hating Donald Trump. And I am not commenting on Donald Trump's presidency one way or the other. But in this particular instance, what Donald Trump did was good for the United States, it was good for humanity, it was good for the State of Israel, and it was good for the Jewish people. And as Alan Dershowitz says, and I agree with him, it was written very, very well, very nuanced, and very well crafted, whoever prepared the speech for him. We're going to go back to Israel, because, again, it's important for us to hear how Israelis are responding and embracing the words of Donald Trump. And so it's my great pleasure to welcome back, as I always love to do, the former Deputy Foreign Minister of the State of Israel, Danny Ayalon, who also was ambassador to the United States for the State of Israel. Danny, thank you so much for joining us from Israel.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, so Danny, I know you've been asked by everyone to comment on this, but I'm asking you to do it all over again. You heard Donald Trump's remarks. What was your immediate response?
Well, first of all, I think it's quite pervasive here in Israel, happiness, satisfaction, being grateful to I think a very, very bold move by the president, the first one who did it since the legislation of the Congress back 22 years ago. And we feel like a major wrong has been corrected, and it was long overdue.
It was long overdue. I talked to an Israeli journalist a few moments ago, Chaviv Rettig Gur. He made an interesting comment. I want to hear whether you agree partially, in total, or whether you disagree. He said, as much as it is an issue for American Jews and the Western world in general, in Israel it's not such a big deal, because Israelis know, they know that Israel's capital is Jerusalem. And so when the president says, now the United States sees it as the capital of Israel, Israelis find it a bit ho-hum. Do you think Chaviv is right? Do you think Israelis are blasé about this decision? Or do you feel Israelis really feel that this is a significant diplomatic move?
I think the latter is correct. It's true what Chaviv says, that, we take it for granted. Jerusalem is our capital, and it's within our own legitimate rights to decide which is our capital. We are the only country in the world, and this is bigotry. This is really discrimination against us, that people do not let us agree on our own capital, especially in light of the ample historical facts, archaeology, and the entire proof that it has only been capital of the Jewish people and none else. We have been here, seeing here so many occupiers, whether it was the Greeks and the Romans and the Muslims and the Ottomans and the British. None of them put it as their capital. Even Jordan occupied the West Bank and Jerusalem and the Temple Mount for 19 years. They didn't put it as their capital. So we do expect that the nations of the world will accord us the same respect as they do each other and anyone else. So Chaviv is right in the sense that, yes, we take it for granted that this is our capital. But on the other hand, we are reminded every time there is a dignitary coming here, and they skip the Kotel, or they skip going into historical places of heritage, whether it's in Hebron or Jerusalem. If you remember, Mark, 6 months ago, President Trump was here.
Yes.
And he did go to the Kotel,
yes,
the Western Wall. However, he made sure, and the American State Department made sure, that it was seen and determined as a private and not an official tour, and they barred Prime Minister Netanyahu to accompany him.
Yes.
I hope that in the next visit that we will have of American leader, Vice President Pence, who is due to come here in 2 weeks' time, I hope that he will be the first American leader who will officially pay a visit to the Western Wall.
Yes. And even though it was not official, my understanding is Donald Trump was the first sitting president to ever visit the wall, whether he was doing it on an official or a private basis, correct?
Well, he was the first one who did it privately, his tour. Private, but he did it in a public way with cameras and reporting and everything else. There were other presidents, and I am not at liberty to say whom, that did visit there, but it was at the, the middle of night.
I see.
Of course, with no cameras. But there were quite a few presidents that visited there, again, privately, but also secretly.
Okay, but you can't tell us who. Off camera, I'm going to find out who. Look, I want to give you my reaction, and I want, again, to hear the extent to which you feel I may be overstating the case or not. I feel that this is a momentous event in the history of the State of Israel, rivaling some of the other key events in Israeli history. And I feel this way because as long as the Western world was saying Israel did not have the right to designate its own capital, which every other sovereign nation has the right to do, implicit in that denial to Israel was a lack of legitimacy at some level. It was a giving into the Palestinian claim that Israel was illegitimate as a whole. Not that America was saying Israel is illegitimate, but if Israel did not have the right to establish its own capital, its legitimacy was compromised. And when the president says today he recognizes the facts on the ground, he recognizes reality, and he lists all the ways in which everybody understands Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. But now America says it, and we expect other Western countries to follow suit. Now he's going to build a new embassy in Jerusalem, a magnificent embassy as a monument to peace. It seems to me, Danny, that this is the ultimate seal of legitimacy, diplomatic legitimacy. Not that Israel needs legitimacy internally, but that on the diplomatic scene, which you are very familiar with, there is an important statement here that in some way completes Israeli sovereignty and legitimacy. Tell me if you think I'm right. Tell me if you think I'm overstating the case.
No, you're not, Mark. Actually, I think you are right on the mark. You always are, Mark. and in this case, I think it's a major endorsement.
Yes.
And of legitimacy, and I believe also that other countries will follow suit. Maybe not immediately. They will wait for the Arab rage to subside. But I believe many will follow suit, and rightly so. The Palestinians have always tried to fight us this political war, and Jerusalem was at the crux of the matter, even though, and you know it, Mark, and I'm sure all your viewers know that we have made so many far-reaching concessions, especially Ehud Barak in Camp David and Ehud Olmert in Annapolis, basically agreeing to divide Jerusalem to no avail. And so what the president did is really an act of leadership. I think it was important for the United States deterrence that he did not cower vis-a-vis the threats of all the terror organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah. And for the first time in years that the United States is back in the driver's seat in the Middle East and not just letting others leading here, whether it was Iran or Russia.
Danny, one last question quickly for you. You heard the president say that his decision today in no way was meant to determine specific boundaries of Jerusalem, by which he meant really East Jerusalem, or contested borders, that those had to be resolved in negotiations between the parties. Anything about that bother you, or are you comfortable with the president saying that?
Well, I think, Mark, that the president's speech was really a masterpiece of statesmanship.
Yes.
And it was balanced enough. He didn't close the door for peace. He did respect all religions, including Islam. He did emphasize the importance of keeping the status quo, including in what he said. And for the first time, I hear him saying the Haram al-Sharif, calling it the Arab term for the temple,
yes.
the Temple Mount. So I believe that what he did was keeping the door open, and everyone that will think otherwise, it's because they do not want peace. I don't think that this speech is the reason of no progress, if indeed there will not be any progress. And it's again, the Palestinians' lack of desire for coexistence, and their still desire to erase us from the map of the Middle East.
Danny, thank you so much for speaking to us. Again, it's late at night in Israel. You always make yourself available to me. And look, I see you also on other venues. You are always articulate and sensitive, and I love you. And I look forward to your coming back to America, and we're sitting in studio together. In the meantime, Kol Tuv V'Hatzlacha. Thank you, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much. It's coming up soon, February, March. I will be with you in New York.
Fabulous. Thank you, Danny. Danny Ayalon, former Deputy Foreign Minister of the State of Israel and Ambassador to Washington. So I want to have one more individual comment on this speech today. This has been a JBS special in response to an historic moment in Jewish and Israeli history as Donald Trump now recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and begins moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. On our phones now, we have the Executive Vice Chairman. No, we don't. Hold on 1 minute. I thought we did. We were... Bowie, this is live television. We're coming to you live today. This is not pre-recorded, so every now and then you'll see what amounts to a glitch. But we try to put this together immediately, given the importance of Donald Trump's remarks. And so every now and then it's a little bit bumpy. So let me look at our control room and see what we're doing. Hold on, hold on. We're going to try to... I was about to introduce Malcolm Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. He, of course, is the executive that heads the umbrella organization of all major organizations, Jewish organizations in America. And we had him on the line, and then something happened, so we're trying to get him again. In the meantime, as I look at my notes, excuse me, I've now been told Malcolm is on the line. So, Malcolm Hoenlein, thank you for joining us.
And my pleasure. You hung up on me before I even said anything. I mean, it usually comes after I say something.
Okay, Malcolm. As I said, I didn't want this program to go without your comments. What was your response? I know you knew it was coming, but still, it was different to actually hear the president today. When you heard what he had to say, he spoke for 11 minutes. We played it earlier in this program in its entirety for our audience. I want to know what your reactions were.
Well, I think it's clearly a very important day. It's an historic recognition. It's an injustice that has been righted. It is not a provocative measure. It is an important statement, an historic statement indeed. But it's an historic statement of recognizing the fact of 3,000 years standing of the connection of the Jewish people to Jerusalem and of the modern state of Israel's 50 years, 70 years of declaring Jerusalem its capital. The president's remarks, I think, were carefully contexted to indicate that this would not preempt negotiations, perhaps even spur it on to show that the longer they wait, the more facts on the ground will be created. And the rejectionism on the Palestinian side has to end for the interests of their people, for the interests of peace. And we are all hopeful that we'll see an embassy there before long. It'll be a process that will take years to complete. And he did not declare the borders. He didn't preempt any issue in the final status negotiations. And I hope it won't be exploited and used for incitement to violence, but rather be taken in the proper context, which I think the president essentially gave today, and we'll just see progress now in bringing the parties together.
Very beautifully said. Malcolm, I want to ask you some of the questions I've addressed to the range of guests who've been on this program already. There are those who have suggested that this limits the United States' ability to act as an honest broker in the peace process. What's your response to that?
It doesn't, because what the United States did was introduce honesty into the program. You can't build peace on falsehoods. Mm-hmm. You can't have resolutions at the UNESCO introduced by the Palestinians, supported by them and others, that deny 3,800 years of Jewish history and 2,000 years of Christian history and say that this is a sound foundation for peace, for discussions, for relationships that we hope will continue to expand in the future. So the idea that this somehow makes America a dishonest broker, I would say that it sends a message that America stands by its allies, that America stands for the truth, that the president sticks to his word. It's something that Arab states and Arab leaders have always said to us, that they look to the United States for those signals. And in fact, they measure the confidence that they can have by how the America-Israel relationship flourishes. So this should be an incentive for negotiations, not a disincentive. The president reaffirmed the commitment to two-state solution, something he has not done certainly in a long time. And if you notice that the threat is that countries say that they will break relations with Israel, not with the United States. So it shows that that's not the real agenda. And
yes.
Frankly, when the president visited Jerusalem and he went to the Kotel and he put on the yarmulke and said Psalms at the wall and declared a Jewish holy site,
yes,
that was as profound a statement to me as what happened today. And there wasn't a single demonstration. There wasn't a single manifestation. Because when you do the right thing, people will understand and accept it. And I hope, and I share the fear and concern that there will be these days of rage and the exploitation of it, that instead of wasting their resources and risking lives, their lives, others' lives, and just taking advantage of a political situation to divert attention from their failures, that the Palestinian leadership and others will use the opportunity to usher in a new era.
Mm-hmm. A similar type question. You know, I've heard Aaron David Miller, who is, I would say he's critical of the president's decision here. And he represents a voice that I hear saying that this was an unnecessary move by the State of Israel, and all it does is destabilize what was something of a status quo as we move towards peace negotiations. That somehow this has destabilized the entire region and the entire dynamic between Israel, the Palestinians, and the Arab world. What's your response?
I don't think that it's destabilized the region. It need not do so unless there are those who want to incite to violence and exploit this circumstance. It doesn't change anything on the ground. The embassy is not moving. There's no geographical change. There was no preemption of the options for the outcome. if one reads the statement carefully. I respect Aaron David Miller, and he's a friend, but I think that the concerns only strengthen those who want to deny Israel their rights, who undermine the process, the chances for peace, by building on fictions and offering options and ways out, rather than holding Palestinian leadership to account and say, here's a chance to deliver. You had every opportunity to negotiate the future and the status of Jerusalem and of everything else, and you keep refusing to do so. So now's the chance when Arab leaders like King Hussein and the Egyptians, Sadat and others, came forward. They got very generous deals. Israel has always said they were ready to negotiate. And to shift the onus now and to say that somehow the president is responsible or anybody else is responsible, when all he did was take a law passed by overwhelming majority of Congress in 95, Democratic and Republican platforms for decades have endorsed this idea. Every presidential candidate, I think, endorsed the idea of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Now he finally acted on what all of them promised to do.
Yes, yes. In essence, Malcolm, what he really did was legitimize certainly West Jerusalem by saying that the boundaries and contested borders will be negotiated with between the two parties. They will ultimately determine where East Jerusalem lies. I want to tell you what I said, and I want to hear whether you agree with me, or as I've said to others, do you feel I'm overstating it? And that's my last question for you. I feel this day is a significant day in the history of the State of Israel because it ultimately gives final legitimacy by the Western nations of the world represented by the United States of the legitimacy of the State of Israel. As long as America and the Western nations did not give Israel the right to designate its own capital, it was in some way playing into the Palestinian rhetoric that Israel itself was in some way illegitimate. And now that the president has said America sees Jerusalem as the sovereign capital of a sovereign nation, it is the last piece that was necessary from May 14th, 1948 to today of giving Israel ultimate and total legitimacy on the international scene. Do you feel there's something accurate in what I'm saying? Do you feel I'm overstating the case?
I do not believe you're overstating. I think you're describing the reality that that exists today, and the what should be the reality, and that a lot of the reaction, the negative reaction, is often based on political positions, not so much on the specifics of the decision that was reached today.
Yes.
And we should not conflate things. We should deal with them. All the concerns, I'm sure many of them come from the heart and are legitimate. We all share concerns about the process, where it will go, but to take this day and try and turn it into a negative in the president's action, something that we in the Conference of Presidents have asserted for decades. We have statements going back to the 70s and 80s about this. So at least we should say back one time and say, thank you, Mr. President, we appreciate it. We hope that it'll lead to significant progress, and it shouldn't be an obstacle. It should be a spur to greater achievements and greater movement towards peace between Israel and the Palestinians, but also in the region.
Amen via amen. Malcolm, thank you for putting an exclamation point on this program. You were the best in the world, my first love, and I always appreciate it that you make time for me and JBS. We'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Be well.
Malcolm Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. My friends, this is a day for celebration. I ask anyone who does not like Donald Trump, read his remarks, but hear it in the voice of Barack Obama. The words were, as you've heard person after person today say, they were well crafted in many ways. They were eloquent. And this is a day that will go down in Jewish history, the day the West began to finally say Jerusalem is the capital of Israel because the sovereign state of Israel has the right to determine its own capital, and we will recognize it. Thank you for joining us for this special JBS presentation. If you're watching it right now in the afternoon on December 6th, Wednesday. Know that you can watch it again tonight at 7 p.m. and it'll run again tomorrow afternoon. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, and to a group of people who helped produce this program, Tisha Bader, Dara Golub, and, of course, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.